I walked into court to my mother's eye roll and father's shame. Then the judge froze, staring at me. Wait, is that her? The silence that followed revealed a truth no one saw coming. What if the people who raised you, the ones who were supposed to protect you, were capable of murder? I thought facing my parents in court to finally prove I wasn't the failure they'd always called me was the hardest thing I'd ever do. I was so wrong. That day I didn't just expose their cruelty. I unearthed a monstrous secret, a 12-year-old crime, that would shatter my entire world and make me question everything I thought I knew about family. As we walked into that courthouse, my mother, Helen, leaned in, her voice a venomous hiss. Don't you dare embarrass us, Anna. Just stay silent and let the actual lawyers handle things. I didn't even dignify her with a response. Every click of my heels on that polished marble floor was a defiant drumbeat, a confidence I'd spent years meticulously building, brick by painful brick. My father, Robert, wouldn't even look at me. His gaze was fixed on some distant, unseen point, as if I were a literal stain on the pristine facade of his life. That dismissive silence? Yeah, that was just classic Robert and Helen. My name's Anna, and at 31 I'd been the family outcast my entire life. The dropout, the failure, the daughter they conveniently forgot when relatives asked about their kids. We were in Omaha, Nebraska, and my parents were there to evict their tenant, a woman named Claire. Her audacity, as my mother so delicately put it, was daring to request essential repairs on a dilapidated building before paying rent. My parents owned 3 rental properties, all inherited from my grandfather. They managed them like medieval overlords, simply collecting tribute. Claire had occupied one of their apartments for 2 years, always paying promptly, until the ceiling started leaking and toxic black mold bloomed in her daughter's bedroom. She'd withheld rent, insisting the repairs be done first. My parents' swift response? An eviction notice. She signed a contract. My mother had shrieked over the phone a fortnight ago. She can't just stop paying because she's picky about a little moisture. A little moisture. That's how she described toxic black mold. I'd caught wind of the case through my younger sister Melissa, 28, who still lived under our parents' suffocating roof. She'd mentioned it offhandedly during one of our rare phone calls, completely unaware that I'd spent the last 7 years grinding my way through law school, juggling 3 jobs, often sleeping in my car, and finally triumphantly passing the bar exam. I'd achieved it all alone, without a penny or a single encouraging word from them. They didn't even know I'd gone to college, let alone become an attorney. The day I'd walked out of their house at 19, my father had hurled my belongings onto the front lawn. You're nothing, he bellowed. You'll never amount to anything without us. My mother had stood framed in the doorway, arms crossed, her eyes cold. Don't come crawling back when you fail. I never did. Not even when I was sleeping in my beat-up car behind a grocery store, surviving on stale vending machine snacks. Not even when exhaustion from overnight shifts made it nearly impossible to stay awake in class. I didn't ask for help. I'd rather starve than swallow my pride and beg from people who'd made it so excruciatingly clear I was worthless. Now, as we neared the courtroom, I watched my mother meticulously smooth her expensive blouse and adjust her pearl necklace. Appearances. They always mattered more to her than anything else. My father strode beside her in his tailored suit, the embodiment of respectability. They'd told everyone at their country club that they had only one daughter, Melissa, who worked as a receptionist at their dentist's office and allowed them to dictate her every move. I don't know why you even bothered coming, my mother muttered, her voice low as we reached the courtroom doors. This doesn't concern you. I simply smiled, a silent, knowing smile. Let them believe I was just there to observe. Let them think I was still the broken girl they'd discarded. Inside, the air crackled with palpable tension. Claire sat at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was a small woman in her 40s, her dress worn, her eyes red-rimmed, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. This wasn't merely about an apartment for her. This was about keeping a roof over her daughter's head. My parents took their seats on the plaintiff's side, radiating a sense of entitlement. My mother actually gestured for me to sit in the gallery behind them, as if I were some inconvenient appendage. I ignored her unspoken command, walking straight past her without a flicker of acknowledgement. My heart hammered, but my stride was firm. I went directly to Claire's table. Excuse me, I said, my voice quiet, though I felt anything but quiet inside. I'm your attorney. Claire's eyes went wide, disbelief warring with a flicker of hope. I couldn't afford one. I was going to represent myself. Consider this pro bono, I told her, setting my briefcase down. I've reviewed your case. You have every right to withhold rent until those repairs are made. Your landlords violated the implied warranty of habitability. The silence behind me was broken by my mother's sharp, strangled gasp. Then my father's voice, low and absolutely furious. What the hell do you think you're doing, Anna? I turned, and for the first time in 12 years I met their eyes directly, refusing to flinch. I'm doing my job, I said, every word a deliberate hammer blow. My mother's face drained of color, then flushed crimson. You can't be serious. You're not a lawyer. The sheer disbelief in her voice was almost comical, if it hadn't been so rooted in their ingrained scorn for me. Actually, I am. I pulled out my bar card, holding it aloft. I passed the bar exam 2 years ago. I've been working at a firm downtown mostly handling tenant rights cases. This is exactly my area of expertise. My father surged to his feet, hands clenched into fists, his face purple. This is ridiculous. You dropped out of community college. You're a homeless bum we threw out for being a waste of space. I was homeless for a while, yes, I said calmly, but the memory stung. Thanks to you. But I worked my way through school. I graduated from college, then law school. I did it all without a single cent from either of you. Before my father could retort, Judge Patricia Holbrook entered and everyone scrambled to their seats. Judge Holbrook, in her 60s with steely gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, made even seasoned attorneys nervous. She surveyed the courtroom, her eyes lingering on me with a flicker of recognition. "Counsel, please approach," she commanded. I walked up to the bench, joined by my parents' attorney, a man named Gerald who charged $500 an hour and looked increasingly uncomfortable. Judge Holbrook looked between us, then down at the papers before her. "I see we have representation for the defendant now. Counselor Anna Thompson, Your Honor," I stated, my voice clear and confident. "I'm representing Claire Mitchell in this matter." Judge Holbrook's eyebrows rose slightly. "Anna Thompson. I thought that name looked familiar. Didn't you argue the Riverside Apartments case last year?" "Yes, Your Honor. You won that case if I recall. The tenants got everything they asked for, repairs, rent reimbursement, and damages." "That's correct, Your Honor." She looked at my parents, then back at me, a subtle but significant shift in her expression. "This should be interesting. Let's proceed." As I returned to my table, I caught my mother's expression. Pure, unadulterated horror mixed with disbelief. My father looked as though he'd been struck. Melissa, sitting behind them, had a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and, was that admiration? I sat next to Claire, who was staring at me as if I'd just performed a miracle. "Thank you," she whispered, tears welling. "I don't know how to thank you. Just tell the truth when you're asked questions," I replied, a small smile touching my lips. "That's all you need to do." Gerald presented my parents' case first, painting Claire as a difficult tenant seeking excuses to avoid rent, exaggerating minor maintenance issues into catastrophes. He displayed photos of the apartment from years ago, pristine and clean when first rented. "The plaintiffs have always maintained their properties to the highest standards," Gerald asserted smoothly. "They are responsible landlords who simply seek what they are owed, the rent agreed upon in a legally binding contract." When it was my turn, I rose and approached the evidence table. I'd spent the last 2 weeks meticulously gathering everything. Photographs of the leaking ceiling, the black mold, the broken windows that wouldn't seal, medical records detailing Claire's daughter's respiratory problems, ignored maintenance requests stretching back months, and a city inspector's report condemning parts of the building as uninhabitable. "Your Honor," I began, laying out the evidence piece by piece, building an undeniable case. The defendant did not withhold rent out of spite or convenience. She withheld it because the apartment she was paying for had become a severe health hazard. Nebraska law is unequivocal. Landlords must maintain properties in a condition fit for human habitation. When they fail to do so, tenants have the legal right to withhold rent until repairs are made. I systematically walked the judge through every violation, every ignored plea, every broken promise. My parents had collected rent for months, fully aware the building was crumbling. They'd threatened Claire when she complained, telling her she could leave if she didn't like it, knowing full well she couldn't afford to break her lease and move. "This isn't about a difficult tenant," I concluded, my voice firm. "This is about landlords who viewed their tenants as mere revenue streams, caring more about collecting money than ensuring the safety and well-being of the people living in their properties." Judge Holbrook listened intently, taking notes, asking incisive questions. When I presented the medical records for Claire's daughter, detailing her worsening asthma and constant infections, I saw the judge's jaw clench. "Counselor," she addressed Gerald, her voice colder now, "did your clients know about the mold?" Gerald shuffled his papers, looking for an escape. "They were aware of some moisture issues." "Did they know about the mold?" she repeated, her voice sharper, cutting through his prevarication. "Yes, Your Honor, but they dispute that it was as severe as the tenant claims. The city inspector's report says otherwise," Judge Holbrook said, her expression toward my parents one of barely concealed disgust. "In fact, it states the entire unit should have been vacated months ago." My mother opened her mouth to speak, a furious protest forming, but my father gripped her arm, silencing her with a look. Judge Holbrook turned back to me. "Continue, Counselor." I presented the remainder of my evidence, building the case brick by damning brick. By the time I finished, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that my parents had been, at best, negligent landlords and at worst, criminally so. They'd jeopardized a child's health for the sake of collecting $1,200 a month. "Your Honor," I stated in closing, "my client is not asking for much. She's asking for what she's legally entitled to, a safe place to live. She's asking for repairs to be made, for the conditions that forced her to withhold rent to be remedied. And she's asking for reimbursement for the medical expenses her daughter incurred as a direct result of living in an unsafe environment." I sat down and Claire reached over to squeeze my hand. Her eyes were filled with tears, not of despair but of immense relief and gratitude. Judge Holbrook looked at my parents for a long, piercing moment. "I'll be honest with you," she said, her voice stern, cutting through the silence. "I've seen a lot of landlord-tenant disputes in my years on the bench, but this is one of the more egregious cases I've encountered." My mother's face had shifted from crimson to ashen. My father looked as though he wished the floor would swallow him whole. "I'm ruling in favor of the defendant," Judge Holbrook continued, her words ringing with authority. "Not only will the eviction be dismissed, but the plaintiffs will be required to make all necessary repairs within 30 days. Additionally, they will reimburse the defendant for 3 months of rent and all medical expenses related to her daughter's respiratory issues. And just so we're clear, if these repairs aren't completed to code within the specified timeframe, I will personally refer this case to the city for further action." She banged her gavel and it was over. Claire broke down sobbing, thanking me profusely, her relief palpable. I helped her gather her belongings, walking her out of the courtroom while she clung to my arm like a lifeline. Behind us, I could hear my parents arguing with Gerald in hushed, furious tones. Outside the courtroom, Claire hugged me tightly. "You saved us," she choked out, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't have to," I said, offering a small, tired smile. "Just take care of your daughter." She left, still weeping with gratitude. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of what had just happened settle over me. 12 years. 12 years of being told I was worthless. Of being treated like I didn't exist. Of fighting every single day to prove I was more than what they said I was. And now, in one afternoon, I'd proven them wrong in the most public, undeniable way possible. I was gathering my things when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find my mother standing there, her face contorted with pure, unbridled rage. "How dare you?" she spat, her voice low and dangerous. "How dare you humiliate us like that?" "I did my job," I said calmly, meeting her furious gaze. "Your job? You call destroying your own family your job?" "You're not my family," I stated, the words flat, devoid of emotion, a truth that had finally cemented itself in my heart. "You stopped being my family the day you threw me out with nothing." My father appeared beside her, his face purple with anger, his eyes blazing. "You ungrateful little, I'm not the one who should be ashamed here." I cut him off, my voice steady despite the tremor of anger deep inside me. "You put a child's health at risk because you were too cheap to fix a leaking roof. You're lucky Judge Holbrook didn't refer you for criminal charges." "We raised you," my mother said, her voice cracking, trying to twist the narrative to play the victim. "We gave you everything." I laughed then, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed in the empty hallway. "You gave me nothing. Everything I have I earned on my own. And you know what? I'm glad you threw me out because it taught me exactly who you are. People who care more about money and appearances than about doing what's right." I walked past them, my head held high, leaving them standing there in their expensive clothes, their pride shattered, their faces a mask of fury and disbelief. But even as I walked away, I knew this wasn't over. My mother never let anything go, and neither did my father. This was just the beginning of their retaliation. I drove back to my office in a haze, replaying the entire scene. The look on Judge Holbrook's face when she recognized me. The horror in my parents' eyes when they realized I wasn't the failure they'd convinced themselves I was. The overwhelming gratitude in Claire's tear-filled voice. It all felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold, a movie playing out before my eyes. My firm, Kestrel and Associates, was in a renovated downtown warehouse. It wasn't fancy, exposed brick walls, second-hand furniture, mismatched coffee mugs, but it was home. Diane Kestrel, the senior partner, had given me my first real break after I passed the bar exam. She'd seen something in me during the interview, something that made her take a chance on a woman with no connections and a resume that listed "lived in a car" as a gap year experience. I'd been there for 2 years, taking cases bigger firms wouldn't touch. Tenant rights, workers' compensation, disability claims, the kind of law that didn't make anyone rich, but helped people who desperately needed it. Diane always said we were in the business of leveling playing fields, and I believed her. This job had given me purpose, shown me that everything I'd suffered through had been worth it if I could use it to help others. When I walked into the office, Diane was waiting in the conference room. She waved me over, her expression indicating she'd already heard about the courtroom victory. Word traveled fast in legal circles. "You did good work today," she said as I sat down. "Claire called me right after court. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her, but she wanted me to know what you did for her." "I just presented the facts," I demurred, feeling a blush creep up my neck. "No," Diane shook her head, her gaze steady. "You gave her hope. You showed her that the system could work, that people like her don't have to just accept being trampled on. That's not nothing, Anna. That's everything." I felt my throat tighten, a wave of emotion washing over me. "Thank you," I managed to say. "But we need to talk about something else." Diane's expression grew serious, a flicker of concern in her eyes. "Your parents, they're not going to let this go, are they?" "No," I admitted, the cold certainty settling in my gut. "They're not." "Do you think they'll retaliate?" "I know they will." I thought about the raw rage in my mother's eyes, the humiliation she must be feeling. They'll try to discredit me, try to ruin my reputation. They have money and connections. They'll use both. Diane was quiet for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. We'll deal with it when it comes. But Anna, you need to be prepared. People like your parents, when they feel cornered, they can be dangerous. Not physically necessarily, but they'll go after everything you've built. I know, I said, a grim determination hardening my features. But I couldn't just stand by and watch them hurt people. Not anymore. I understand. And for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. What you did today took immense courage. After Diane left, I sat alone in the conference room staring out at the Omaha skyline. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. It was beautiful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was coming. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. * Mom and Dad are furious. They're talking about suing you. Please be careful. * I didn't respond. What was there to say? Of course they were furious. Of course they wanted revenge. That's who they were. People who couldn't stand to be challenged, who would rather destroy someone than admit they were wrong. But I'd faced worse than their anger. I'd survived homelessness, poverty, and years of their emotional abuse. Whatever they threw at me now, I could handle it. At least that's what I told myself. As I packed up my things to leave, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, my fingers hovering over the screen, but a strange premonition made me pick up. Anna Thompson? A man's voice asked, low and serious. Yes. Who is this? My name is Henry Bradford. I was your grandfather's attorney. I need to speak with you about something urgent. Something your parents don't know about. My heart started racing, a sudden cold dread coiling in my stomach. What could this possibly be? What is it? I pressed, my voice barely a whisper. Not over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? 9 a.m. at my office. Yes. I'll be there. He gave me the address and hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, my mind spinning. What could my grandfather's attorney want after all these years? My grandfather had died 12 years ago. His estate settled and distributed. What could possibly be urgent now? I had a feeling I was about to find out, and something told me it was going to change everything. Henry Bradford's office was in an old downtown building, the kind with marble floors and brass fixtures that spoke of a bygone era. I arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, my stomach churning with anticipation and a growing sense of unease. The receptionist, a kind older woman, led me to a corner office where Henry sat behind a massive oak desk, surrounded by file cabinets and leather-bound law books. He was in his 70s with white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He stood when I entered, extending his hand. Anna, thank you for coming on such short notice. You said it was urgent, I replied, shaking his hand, my voice a little tight. What's this about? He gestured for me to sit and pulled a thick aged folder from his desk drawer. I've been your grandfather's attorney for 40 years. When he died, I handled his estate according to his wishes. But there was one provision in his will that was kept sealed. A provision that could only be opened under specific conditions. My pulse quickened, a cold premonition creeping over me. What kind of provision? Your grandfather loved you very much, Anna. He saw how your parents treated you and it broke his heart. So he made arrangements to protect you. Henry opened the folder and slid a document across the desk. He established a trust fund in your name, $50,000 to be released when you turned 30, or when you obtained a professional degree, whichever came first. I stared at the document, unable to speak, my mind reeling. $50,000? It was more money than I'd ever had, more than I'd ever imagined having in one place. My grandfather, he'd actually done this for me? You passed the bar exam 2 years ago, Henry continued, a gentle smile on his face. That met the conditions. The money has been sitting in trust, accumulating interest. It's now worth nearly $60,000. Why didn't you tell me sooner? My voice came out as a whisper, thick with emotion. Your grandfather's instructions were explicit. The trust was to remain completely confidential until you met the conditions. He didn't want your parents to know about it. Didn't want them to interfere or try to claim it for themselves. He knew them too well. I thought about my grandfather, James. The quiet man who'd always had a kind word for me when my parents didn't. The only one who seemed to believe I could be something more than what my parents said I was. Tears welled in my eyes. There's something else, Henry said, pulling out a sealed envelope. Your grandfather wrote you a letter. He asked me to give it to you when the time came. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in my grandfather's careful handwriting. Dear Anna, if you're reading this, then you've done what I always knew you could do. You've made something of yourself despite everything they've thrown at you. I'm proud of you, even though I won't be there to tell you in person. I know your parents have made your life difficult. I've watched them favor your sister, watched them tear you down whenever you tried to rise. It broke my heart, but I couldn't change them. All I could do was try to give you a foundation to build on. This money isn't a solution to all your problems, but it's a start. Use it wisely. Build the life you deserve. And remember, you are worth more than they will ever understand. There's one more thing I need you to know. I was planning to change my will completely, to leave you half of everything. Half the properties, half my savings. You deserved it more than they did. But I ran out of time. Be careful, Anna. Your parents are not good people. They care more about money than anything else, even family. Don't let them destroy you. You're stronger than they are. Asterisk love always. Grandpa. Tears streamed down my face as I read the letter, a profound ache in my chest. My grandfather had wanted to give me more. He'd been planning to change his will to make sure I was truly taken care of, but he died before he could do it. The phrase "he ran out of time" echoed ominously in my mind. There's something you should know, Henry said gently, pulling me from my thoughts. The week before your grandfather died, your mother came to see me. She was asking questions about his will, about whether he'd made any recent changes. I didn't tell her anything, of course, attorney-client privilege, but she was very persistent, very concerned about the estate. A chill ran down my spine, a terrifying thought beginning to form. You think she knew he was planning to change the will? I can't say for certain, but the timing was suspicious. Your grandfather was in perfect health one week and the next week he was dead. Heart failure, they said, but he just had a physical exam and his doctor told him he had the heart of a man 20 years younger. My heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. What are you saying? Henry leaned back in his chair, choosing his words carefully, his gaze unwavering. I'm saying that when someone stands to lose a significant inheritance, they might do things they wouldn't otherwise do. I'm saying that your grandfather's death was very convenient for your parents. And I'm saying that if you look closely at the circumstances, you might find some questions that were never properly answered. My mind was reeling, a terrifying kaleidoscope of possibilities. Was he suggesting what I thought he was suggesting? That my parents had something to do with my grandfather's death? My own parents. I have no proof, Henry continued as if sensing my internal turmoil. Just an old lawyer's suspicions. But I thought you should know, especially now that you've gone up against them in court. They've shown you what they're capable of when their money is threatened. Imagine what they might do if the stakes were even higher. I left Henry's office in a daze, clutching the folder with the trust documents and my grandfather's letter. $60,000. It was enough to pay off the student loans I was still chipping away at. Enough to have a real emergency fund. Enough to finally breathe. But all I could think about was Henry's chilling words. Your grandfather's death was very convenient for your parents. I drove straight to the public library, my mind racing, and spent the next 3 hours digging through old newspaper archives. I found my grandfather's obituary, brief and respectful. Died peacefully at home, surrounded by family. But there was another article, smaller, from a week later. A letter to the editor from my grandfather's longtime physician, Dr. Russell Hayes, expressing shock at the sudden death of a patient he'd just examined and declared perfectly healthy. I found Dr. Hayes's contact information and called his old office number. He'd retired 5 years ago, but the receptionist gave me his home number. When I called, he answered on the third ring. Dr. Hayes, my name is Anna Thompson. I'm calling about my grandfather, James Thompson. You were his doctor. There was a pause, a significant silence on the other end. James Thompson. Yes, I remember him. A good man. His death was such a shock. Can I ask you something? You wrote a letter to the newspaper saying you were surprised by his death. Why? Another pause, longer this time. Are you asking as his granddaughter or in some other capacity? I'm an attorney, I said, my voice firm despite the tremor of fear. And I have reason to believe there might have been something suspicious about his death. Meet me at Elmwood Park in an hour, Dr. Hayes said, his voice dropping to a low, urgent tone. There's something you need to know. Dr. Hayes was sitting on a bench near the pond when I arrived, feeding breadcrumbs to the ducks. He was in his 80s now, with stooped shoulders and liver-spotted hands, but his eyes when he looked at me were sharp and alert, filled with a haunted sorrow. Thank you for meeting me, I said, sitting beside him. He didn't look at me directly, just kept tossing breadcrumbs to the eagerly quacking ducks. I've carried this guilt for 12 years. Maybe it's time to let it go. What guilt? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. Your grandfather came to see me 2 days before he died. He was concerned about some symptoms he'd been having. Nausea, dizziness, tingling in his extremities. I ran some tests, blood work, but the results wouldn't be back for a week. I told him it was probably nothing. Maybe a virus. I sent him home. Dr. Hayes's voice cracked. What were the test results? I pushed, my breath held tight in my chest. They showed elevated levels of digoxin in his blood. Digoxin is a heart medication, but your grandfather wasn't taking any heart medication. The levels were high enough to cause arrhythmia. Heart failure. High enough to kill someone. My breath caught. My stomach churned, a wave of nausea washing over me. You're saying he was poisoned? I'm saying that someone gave him digoxin, Dr. Hayes confirmed, his voice barely a whisper, probably in his food or drink over several days. By the time the test results came back, he was already dead. I went to the police, but they said there wasn't enough evidence to open an investigation. The medical examiner ruled it natural causes, heart failure. They said the digoxin in his system could have been a false positive, or residue from some other medication. Without an autopsy showing clear poisoning, they wouldn't pursue it. Why didn't you push harder? The question burst from me, raw and accusatory. Dr. Hayes finally looked at me and I saw deep shame in his eyes, a lifetime of regret etched into his face. Your father came to see me. He said the family wanted to remember James peacefully, without the trauma of an investigation. He said it would destroy your grandmother to think someone had hurt him. And he offered me money. A lot of money to let it go, to accept the medical examiner's ruling and move on. You took the money. The words felt heavy, bitter on my tongue. To my eternal shame, yes. I was 3 years from retirement and my wife had just been diagnosed with cancer. We needed the money for her treatment. So, I told myself it was probably nothing, that I was seeing conspiracies where there were none. I let them bury your grandfather without answers. I felt sick to my stomach, a cold, hard knot of rage forming. My father had bribed Dr. Hayes to stay quiet about evidence of poisoning, which meant he knew exactly what had killed my grandfather. Which meant he'd either done it himself or helped cover it up. My parents. Capable of this. Dr. Hayes, would you be willing to testify to this? To put it in a sworn statement. He nodded slowly, his gaze steady now, resolute. Yes. I'm old now and my wife passed away 5 years ago. I don't need their blood money anymore and I don't want to die carrying this secret. If you're going after them, I'll help you. I got Dr. Hayes' statement recorded and notarized that same afternoon, my hands still shaking with a mixture of horror and grim determination. Then I went straight to the district attorney's office. A sharp, formidable woman named Catherine Morris, listened to everything I had to say, her expression growing increasingly serious. She looked at the documents, read Dr. Hayes' sworn statement and leaned back in her chair. This is serious, she said, her voice grave. If what you're saying is true, we're looking at murder. But it's been 12 years. Physical evidence will be long gone. We'd need more than just elevated digoxin levels and a doctor's suspicions. What about motive? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. My grandfather was about to change his will. My parents stood to lose millions if he did. Henry Bradford, his attorney, can testify that my mother was asking questions about the will right before he died. That's circumstantial. We need something concrete. Bank records showing they were in severe financial trouble. Proof they purchased digoxin. Witnesses who saw them administering it. Something. I left the DIS office feeling frustrated, a cold wave of despair washing over me. I had enough to raise suspicions but not enough to prove anything. My parents had covered their tracks well, too well. But then I remembered something. When I was younger, before everything fell apart, my mother kept meticulous records of everything. She had files for every receipt, every bill, every transaction. She was obsessed with documentation, with having proof of everything. And if she was that obsessive 12 years ago, I called Melissa. We hadn't spoken since the courthouse and I wasn't sure she'd answer, but she did. On the 4th ring. Her voice was quiet, hesitant. Anna. Melissa, I said, my voice tight with urgency. I need your help with something. Something incredibly difficult. I can't. Mom and Dad are furious about the court case. They've forbidden me to talk to you. Melissa, listen to me. I think they killed Grandpa. Silence on the other end. Then a shocked, shaky whisper. What? I told her everything. The trust fund, Henry's suspicions, Dr. Hayes' statement about the digoxin poisoning. I told her about my grandfather's plans to change his will, about my mother's suspicious visit to Henry's office, about the bribe to Dr. Hayes. I laid it all out, cold and brutal. That's impossible, Melissa said, but her voice wavered, tinged with a fragile disbelief. They wouldn't. They couldn't. They put a child's health at risk to save money on repairs, I said, my voice sharp with the bitter truth. They threw me out onto the street when I was 19. They sued me for emotional distress when I dared to stand up to them. What makes you think they're above murder? But Grandpa, he was their father. He was also worth $2 million, I retorted, the anger simmering beneath my calm facade, and they were about to lose half of it. Melissa was quiet for a long, agonizing time. I could almost hear her world shattering in that silence. Then she said, her voice barely audible, what do you need from me? Mom keeps records, right? Financial documents, receipts, everything. Does she still have files from 12 years ago? Yes. He keeps everything in the storage room in the basement. It's all organized by year. Obsessively. I need you to look for anything from the months before Grandpa died. Bank statements, credit card bills, pharmacy receipts. Anything that might show they were in financial trouble, or that they purchased digoxin. Anna, I can't just go through their private files. That's unthinkable. Yes, you can, I insisted, my voice firm. Because if I'm right, Melissa, they murdered our grandfather for money. And they've spent the last 12 years living off that blood money while letting everyone think he died naturally. Don't you want to know the truth? Don't you think Grandpa deserves justice? Another long silence, heavier than before. Then her voice small but steady, I'll look. But Anna, if I find something, if this is real, what happens to them? They go to prison, I said simply, the words a cold, undeniable fact. For the rest of their lives. And what happens to me? I didn't have an answer for that. Because if my parents went to prison for murder, Melissa, the golden child, the favorite, the one they'd spent their lives protecting and spoiling, would be left alone. She'd have nothing. No family, no support, no illusions left about who her parents really were. I'm sorry, I said finally, my voice softening, but the truth matters more than comfort. It has to. I'll call you tomorrow, Melissa said and hung up. I sat in my car outside the DA's office, staring at my phone, the weight of my request pressing down on me. I just asked my sister to betray our parents, to help me send them to prison for murder. Part of me felt a wrenching guilt about it, but a larger part felt nothing but cold, unshakable determination. Because if they'd really killed my grandfather, they deserved whatever happened to them. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work. My mind was a whirlwind of anxieties and possibilities. I kept imagining what Melissa might find, kept playing out scenarios in my head. What if there was undeniable proof? What if there wasn't? What if Melissa changed her mind and told our parents what I was doing? But the next evening Melissa called. Her voice was shaking, high-pitched with terror and disbelief. I found something, she whispered. Anna, I found something bad. We met at a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town, far from anywhere our parents might see us. Melissa looked terrible, pale and hollow-eyed, like she hadn't slept either. She sat across from me and slid a worn folder across the table with trembling hands. I went through everything, she said, her voice barely audible. Bank statements, credit card bills, all of it. And I found these. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of credit card statements from the 3 months before my grandfather died. There were charges to pharmacies, medical supply companies, online retailers. Melissa had highlighted several entries in yellow. This one, she pointed to a charge from an online pharmacy, her finger tracing the words, is for Digitalis purpurea seeds. That's foxglove. It contains digoxin naturally. You can extract it if you know how. My heart pounded, a deafening drum against my ribs. They bought the poison. My mother bought the poison. That's not all. She pulled out more papers, her hands shaking so violently the pages rustled. Look at these bank statements. 2 months before Grandpa died, their checking account was overdrawn by $30,000. They had maxed out 3 credit cards. They were drowning in debt. I stared at the numbers. My parents had been nearly bankrupt. They'd made bad investments, overspent and run themselves into a financial hole. And then, conveniently, my grandfather died. And they inherited everything. There's more, Melissa said quietly, her voice flat, devoid of all emotion. She pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. I found this hidden in Mom's desk drawer. It's her handwriting. My hands felt numb as I took the notebook. The first few pages were ordinary grocery lists, appointment reminders, nothing unusual. But then I found a page dated 3 weeks before my grandfather's death. *J says he's changing the will. Giving half to Anna. Can't let that happen. We'll lose everything. Need to act fast. My hands shook uncontrollably as I turned the page. My eyes scanned the chilling words. Research shows digoxin hard to detect. Natural compound could look like heart failure. J takes tea every morning. Easy to add to tea. The next entries were meticulous dosage calculations, research notes about how much digoxin would be needed to cause heart failure without being immediately obvious. The final entry, dated the day after my grandfather died, sent a cold shiver of pure horror through me. It's done. Doctor said heart failure. No one suspects. We're safe. Properties are ours. I looked up at Melissa, and she was crying silently, tears streaming down her face, her body trembling. She killed him, Melissa whispered, her voice choked with anguish. Mom killed Grandpa. He planned it. She researched it. He did it. And Dad must have known. He helped cover it up. I carefully photographed every page with my phone, my fingers still numb. Then I looked at Melissa, my sister, who had just helped expose a truth that would destroy our family forever. Are you willing to testify to where you found these? To confirm this is your mother's handwriting. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, her resolve hardening even through her tears. I have to. I can't protect them anymore. Not after this. Grandpa was good to us. He loved us. And they killed him for money. Melissa, once we take this to the police, there's no going back. They'll be arrested. They'll go to trial. Everything will come out. I know. Her voice was small but steady, a newfound strength emerging from the wreckage. But it's the right thing to do. You taught me that in the courtroom when you stood up for Claire. You showed me what it means to do the right thing even when it's hard. Even when it costs you something. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Thank you. I know this isn't easy. Nothing about this is easy, she said, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. But Grandpa deserves justice and you deserved better than what they did to you. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. We went to the police station together, the folder of evidence feeling impossibly heavy in my hands. Catherine Morris, the DA, was called in even though it was after hours. We laid out everything. The trust fund, Dr. Hayes' sworn statement, the financial records, the damning notebook. Catherine's expression grew darker, colder with each piece of evidence. This is enough, she said, her voice hard. Finally, we can get a warrant. We'll arrest them tonight. Tonight. Melissa's voice cracked, the reality of it hitting her hard. The longer we wait, the more chance they have to destroy evidence or flee. Catherine explained, her gaze firm. If they realize what's happening, they might run. We need to move fast. 2 hours later, I sat in Catherine's office, watching through a monitor as police officers arrived at my parents' sprawling, expensive house. Melissa sat beside me, gripping my hand so tightly it hurt her knuckles white. We watched our mother, Helen, answer the door in her expensive silk robe. Watched her face change from confusion to pure, unadulterated horror as the officers read her rights, her world collapsing around her. We watched our father, Robert, try to bluster his way out of it, his usual arrogance failing him, watched him be handcuffed and led to a patrol car. It's real, Melissa whispered, her voice barely a breath. It's really happening. I felt numb. All those years of being told I was worthless, of being thrown away like garbage, it all came from people who were capable of murder. People who had killed a kind old man because he wanted to make sure I was taken care of. The arraignment was set for the next morning. Catherine had enough evidence for charges of first-degree murder, evidence tampering, and fraud. The bail was set at $2 million, exactly the amount they'd received from my grandfather's life insurance policy. They couldn't pay it. They'd spent most of the money already, and their assets were frozen pending investigation. My parents would sit in jail awaiting trial. The news spread fast like wildfire. Within 24 hours, every local station was covering the story. Prominent landlords arrested for murder. Woman discovers parents killed grandfather, 12-year-old murder case reopened. My face was everywhere, and so was Melissa's. The press painted me as the heroic daughter who uncovered the truth and painted my parents as monsters who'd literally gotten away with murder for over a decade. The firm where I worked was flooded with calls. Some were from former tenants of my parents wanting to share their own stories of abuse and negligence, their voices filled with bitter triumph. Others were from attorneys offering support, shocked by the audacity of my parents' crimes. A few were from news outlets wanting interviews. But one call stood out. It came 3 days after my parents' arrest from a lawyer representing Claire, the tenant I'd defended in court. Anna, you need to know something, the lawyer said, his voice grave. After your parents were arrested, 3 other tenants came forward. They all had similar stories. Unsafe conditions, threats, intimidation. But one of them, a man named Thomas, said your father threatened him last year. Told him if he didn't drop his complaints about a broken furnace, he'd end up like your grandfather. Thomas thought it was just a figure of speech, a dramatic outburst, the lawyer continued. But now it sounds like a confession, I finished, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Exactly. Thomas is willing to testify. This could strengthen the prosecution's case even more. I thanked the lawyer and hung up, my mind reeling. My father had practically admitted to murder, had used my grandfather's death as a threat, as leverage. The sheer arrogance of it, the absolute certainty that they'd gotten away with it and would never be caught, made me sick. That evening, Melissa and I met at my apartment. She'd moved out of our parents' house, staying with a friend while she figured out her next steps. She looked lost and broken, but there was something else in her eyes, too. A kind of clarity she'd never had before, a dawning realization of the truth. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, she said, her voice soft, haunted. Or maybe didn't want to see. The way they talked about Grandpa after he died, like they were relieved more than sad. The way they spent money so freely right after the inheritance came through. How they always discouraged me from asking questions about his death. You were young, I said, reaching for her hand, and they were your parents. You trusted them. You wanted to believe in them. I shouldn't have. I should have questioned things. Should have stood up for you when they kicked you out. Should have done a lot of things differently. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, a raw vulnerability I'd never seen before. Can you forgive me? There's nothing to forgive, I said, squeezing her hand. You were caught in their web too, just in a different way. They manipulated you, used you. But you broke free. That's what matters. You chose truth. She nodded, wiping her eyes. What happens now? Now we wait for trial. We testify. We make sure they never hurt anyone else again. And after that? I thought about it. After the trial, after justice was served, what would be left? Melissa and I would have each other, but we'd never have a family the way other people did. We'd never have parents we could trust. No more holidays without ghosts. No past we could look back on without flinching. But maybe that was okay. Maybe we could build something new, something better. Maybe we could be the family we'd never had. After that, I said, looking out at the city lights, we figure out how to move forward together. We build our own lives, our own family. Melissa smiled, a fragile but genuine smile, a glimmer of hope in her sorrow. Together, she repeated, a quiet promise. Outside my apartment window, the sun was setting over Omaha. Tomorrow would bring more headlines, more questions, more pain to process. But tonight, sitting with my sister, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt like maybe, finally, things were going to be okay. The trial began 6 months later in a courtroom packed with reporters, former tenants, and curious onlookers, all drawn by the sensational nature of the case. I sat in the front row with Melissa, both of us dressed in dark, conservative suits, side by side, a silent testament to our shared resolve. Across the aisle, my parents sat with their attorney, a desperate-looking man named Frank, who'd taken their case because no one else would touch it. My mother looked nothing like the polished, imperious woman who'd walked into the courthouse 6 months ago. Her expensive clothes were gone, replaced with an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on her frame. Her hair, once meticulously styled, had gone prematurely gray. She'd aged a decade in jail, her face etched with bitterness, not remorse. My father sat hunched beside her, defeated before the trial even started, his usual bluster replaced by a vacant stare. Judge Holbrook presided, the same judge who'd ruled in Claire's favor. When she saw me, her gaze lingered for a moment and she gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. I nodded back, a silent understanding passing between us. The prosecution's case was devastating. Catherine Morris, sharp and relentless, laid out the evidence piece by piece, building an undeniable narrative of greed, premeditation, and murder. She presented the financial records showing my parents' desperate situation, the looming bankruptcy that had driven them to such an act. She showed the jury the small leather-bound notebook with my mother's unmistakable handwriting, her chilling research into digoxin, her cold, calculated plan for administering dosages and ensuring detection would be avoided. Dr. Hayes testified, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and profound regret, about the elevated digoxin levels in my grandfather's blood and about my father's bribe to keep him quiet. He apologized, tears in his eyes, for staying silent for so long, for his complicity, and several jurors wiped their eyes as he spoke, clearly moved by his confession. Henry Bradford, my grandfather's attorney, testified about my mother's suspicious visit, about her persistent questions regarding the will just days before my grandfather's death. He explained how my grandfather had planned to change everything, to give me half his estate, to ensure I was protected from his increasingly greedy and manipulative children. He read my grandfather's final wishes aloud in court, and my throat tightened, the words echoing with a bittersweet ache. Thomas, the former tenant, took the stand and recounted my father's chilling threat. He said if I didn't shut up about the furnace, I'd end up like his father-in-law. I thought he was just being dramatic. Now, I know he was confessing. The jury visibly flinched. When it was time for Melissa to testify, she walked to the stand with her head held high, a remarkable transformation from the trembling woman who'd handed me that folder. She looked directly at our parents as she swore to tell the truth, her gaze steady, unwavering. "Please describe what you found in your mother's desk," Catherine said gently. Melissa's voice was steady, clear, resounding through the silent courtroom. "I found a notebook in her handwriting. It detailed plans to poison my grandfather with digoxin extracted from foxglove seeds. It included dosage calculations and notes about how to administer it without detection. The final entry stated that it was done, that he died as planned, and that they were safe." My mother's attorney tried to object, tried to claim the notebook could have been planted or forged, but handwriting experts had already confirmed it was my mother's writing. There was no disputing it. "Why did you come forward with this evidence?" Catherine asked, giving Melissa space to explain. Melissa looked at me, then back at the jury, her eyes filled with a raw, undeniable truth. "Because my grandfather was a good man who loved us. He didn't deserve to die for money. And my sister didn't deserve to be thrown away like garbage because our parents were greedy. The truth matters more than protecting people who don't deserve protection." My mother started crying then, loud, theatrical sobs, but no one in that courtroom had sympathy for her. The jury's faces were stone, their expressions unyielding. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand feeling strangely calm, detached. I'd been preparing for this moment for months, replaying every detail, every emotion. But now that it was here, I felt a quiet certainty. Catherine asked me to describe my relationship with my parents, and I told the truth. All of it. The favoritism, the emotional abuse, the day they threw me out, the years of homelessness and struggle, the way they tried to destroy my career when I dared to stand up to them. "Why do you think they treated you this way?" Catherine asked, guiding me to the core of the psychological manipulation. "Because I represented something they couldn't control," I said, my voice clear and firm, the truth finally given voice. "Because my grandfather loved me and they couldn't stand that. Because if they acknowledged my worth, they'd have to confront their own cruelty. It was easier for them to pretend I was worthless than to admit they'd failed as parents, as human beings." My mother's attorney cross-examined me, trying to paint me as vindictive, as someone with an axe to grind. "Isn't it true that you've hated your parents for years? That you've wanted revenge since they kicked you out?" "I didn't hate them," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "I was hurt. There's a difference. And I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice, for their tenant, for my grandfather, for all the people they'd hurt. If that happened to bring consequences down on them, that's because of their choices, not mine. But you benefit from this, don't you? If they're convicted, you inherit everything." "I don't want their money," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "I never did. I built my own life without them. The inheritance can go to their victims, the tenants they abused, the people they hurt. I just want them held accountable." The prosecution rested, and Frank, my parents' attorney, tried to mount a defense. He called character witnesses who testified that my parents were upstanding citizens, generous donors to charity, pillars of the community, but it all rang hollow against the mountain of undeniable evidence. When my mother took the stand in her own defense, she claimed the notebook was just dark fiction, that she'd been writing a crime novel, and those were merely story notes. No one believed her. The jury scoffed. The trial lasted 3 weeks. When closing arguments came, Catherine stood before the jury and said simply, her voice ringing with moral authority, "They murdered a kind man in cold blood for money. They poisoned him slowly, watched him suffer and felt no remorse. They've spent 12 years living off blood money while his granddaughter slept in her car. Justice demands a verdict of guilty." The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood, her face grim. "On the count of first-degree murder, how do you find?" "Guilty." My mother collapsed, wailing, a horrifying animalistic sound. My father sat motionless, staring at nothing, a broken shell of a man. "On the count of evidence tampering, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the count of fraud?" "Guilty." Judge Holbrook set sentencing for 2 weeks later. As the bailiffs led my parents away, my mother turned and looked at me one last time. There was pure, undiluted hate in her eyes, a chilling reflection of the monster she had become. I looked back at her and felt nothing. Just an empty, hollow piece. Sentencing day arrived, cold and gray, matching the somber mood in the courtroom. Judge Holbrook looked down at my parents with an expression of profound disappointment and barely concealed disgust. "I've been on the bench for 27 years, she said, her voice stern and unyielding. "I've seen every kind of crime, every kind of criminal, but what you did stands out for its sheer callousness. You murdered your own father, your children's grandfather, for money. You calculated the dosage, administered the poison, and watched him die. And then you spent 12 years living comfortably off his estate while your daughter, the one he wanted to protect, struggled to survive homeless and alone." My mother tried to speak, to protest, but Judge Holbrook held up her hand, silencing her with a look. "You had every advantage. Money, education, opportunity. And you used all of it to hurt people. Your tenants lived in squalor while you collected rent. Your daughter was thrown out to fend for herself. And your father, a good man by all accounts, was murdered in his own home. The law requires me to sentence you, but I can tell you that no sentence will ever be enough for what you've done." She looked at the papers in front of her, her voice ringing with finality. "On the count of first-degree murder, I sentence you each to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On the counts of evidence tampering and fraud, I sentence you each to an additional 15 years, to run consecutively. You will spend the rest of your lives behind bars, and that is far less than you deserve." The gavel came down with a resounding, definitive thud. My mother screamed, a sound of pure anguish and impotent rage that echoed through the courtroom, tearing at the silence. My father sat silent, tears streaming down his face, a broken man. As they were led away, my mother turned to me one last time, her eyes blazing with a hate that would follow her to her grave. "I hope you're satisfied," she spat, her voice raw. "You've destroyed this family." "No," I said clearly, standing up so she could hear me, my voice steady and unwavering. "You destroyed this family when you chose money over people, when you chose greed over love. I just made sure everyone knew the truth." She was dragged away, still screaming, and the courtroom erupted in noise. Reporters shouting questions, former tenants cheering, Melissa grabbing my hand and squeezing it tight, tears in her eyes. Outside the courthouse, Catherine Morris held a press conference. "Today, justice was served for James Thompson and for all the victims of Helen and Robert Thompson's greed," she announced, her voice firm. "This case demonstrates that no one is above the law, that wealth and status cannot protect you when you commit heinous crimes. I want to especially commend Anna Thompson and Melissa Thompson for their courage in coming forward, for choosing truth over a twisted sense of family loyalty." Reporters turned to me, shoving microphones in my face, a frenzy of questions. "How do you feel seeing your parents sentenced to life?" "Relieved," I said honestly, the word escaping like a quiet exhale. "Not happy, not triumphant, just relieved that they can't hurt anyone else. Relieved that the truth is finally out." "Will you accept the inheritance?" "No. Everything they have will go to a fund for their former tenants, the people they actually hurt and exploited. That's what my grandfather would have wanted." "What's next for you?" I thought about it. "I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing. Helping people who need legal representation but can't afford it. Making sure landlords are held accountable. Trying to make the system work for people who usually get trampled by it." That night, Melissa and I went to my grandfather's grave. We hadn't been there together since the funeral 12 years ago. The headstone was simple. Asterisk James Thompson, beloved father and grandfather. 1940-2013. Asterisk, we got them, Grandpa, Melissa said softly, kneeling by the stone, her voice thick with emotion. "They're going to pay for what they did to you." I knelt beside her, a profound sense of peace settling over me. "I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry you didn't get to see me become an attorney. Didn't get to see me prove them wrong. But I hope you know I never forgot what you told me. That I was worth more than they said. You were right." We sat there for a while in silence, the cold wind rustling through the bare trees. Finally, Melissa spoke. "What happens to us now? We're orphans in a way. No parents, no family except each other. We build something new," I said, looking at her, a gentle smile on my face. "Something better. We become the family we never had. I'd like that, she said, a fragile but genuine smile gracing her lips. You know, I've been thinking about going back to school, maybe becoming a paralegal working with you at the firm. Diane would love that. I laughed, a genuine joyful sound. We're always short-staffed. It's strange, Melissa said, a thoughtful, somber look on her face. I spent my whole life trying to be what they wanted. The perfect daughter, the obedient one. And it was all for nothing. They didn't really love me. They just loved that I was easy to control. They were incapable of real love, I said, reaching for her hand. That was their failing, not yours and not mine. We deserved better parents. Grandpa knew that. We left flowers on the grave. Violets, his favorite. As we walked back to the car, I felt something shift inside me. The anger that had driven me for so long, the need for vindication, the burning desire to prove myself. It was fading. Not gone entirely, but quieter now. Manageable. Anna, Melissa said as we drove away, her voice full of emotion, thank you for not giving up. For fighting. For showing me what courage looks like. You showed courage too, I said, meeting her gaze. Coming forward with that evidence testifying against them, that took strength I'm not sure I would have had in your position. We were both strong, she said. Just in different ways. But we're stronger together. I smiled. Yeah, we are. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in my life I wasn't facing it alone, and that made all the difference. 3 months after the sentencing, I stood in the conference room at Kestrel and Associates, looking at the faces of 23 former tenants of my parents' properties. They'd all come at my invitation to learn about the restitution fund that had been established. The court has ordered the liquidation of all assets belonging to Helen and Robert Thompson, I explained, my voice carrying clearly through the room. The 3 rental properties have been sold, personal assets, investments, everything. After legal fees and court costs, there's approximately $1.8 million remaining. That money will be divided among all verified victims, tenants who suffered due to unsafe living conditions, people who paid medical bills because of their negligence, anyone who was harmed by their actions. Claire, the woman whose case had started everything, raised her hand, her eyes shining with disbelief and hope. How much will each person get? It depends on the severity of harm and documentation of damages, I explained, but we estimate between $30,000 and $70,000 per person. Some will get more if they can prove significant medical expenses or ongoing health issues. A man in the back stood up, his voice choked with emotion. That money should go to you. You're the one who brought them down. You sacrificed everything to get justice. I shook my head, a quiet certainty in my voice. I didn't do this for money. I did it because it was right. This money belongs to the people they hurt. I have my grandfather's trust fund. That's more than enough. The meeting continued for another hour with people sharing their stories, crying, hugging each other. These were people who'd been victimized and silenced, who thought no one cared about their suffering. Now they were being heard, being compensated, being vindicated. After everyone left, Diane came into the conference room, a proud smile on her face. That was a good thing you did. A lot of lawyers would have taken a hefty portion as fees. I'm not interested in profiting from my parents' crimes, I said, the thought distasteful. Besides, I have enough. The trust fund paid off my loans and gave me a cushion. I don't need more. Speaking of which, Diane said, her expression growing serious. I have a proposition for you. I'm getting older, thinking about retirement in a few years. I'd like you to consider becoming a partner, eventually taking over the firm entirely. I stared at her, my mouth slightly agape. Are you serious? Completely. You're the best attorney I've ever trained. You care about the clients. You fight like hell. And you understand what it's like to be powerless. This firm needs someone like that at the helm. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Diane smiled, a genuine warmth in her eyes. Think about it. We can discuss details later. That evening, I met Melissa for dinner at a quiet downtown restaurant. She'd started classes at the community college, working toward a paralegal certificate. She looked healthier than I'd seen her in years, with color in her cheeks and a light in her eyes that had been absent for so long. How was your day? She asked, a genuine interest in her voice. Surreal, I admitted, a slight laugh escaping me. I distributed almost $2 million to people our parents victimized, and Diane offered to make me a partner in the firm. Melissa's eyes widened, her jaw dropping slightly. That's incredible. Are you going to accept? I think so. Feels right, like everything I went through led to this. Like this is what I was meant to do. Grandpa would be so proud, she said softly, a wistful smile. You became exactly who he knew you could be. We ordered our food and talked about normal things. Her classes, my cases, whether we should adopt a cat for my apartment. It felt strange and wonderful to have a normal conversation with my sister, to have a relationship not poisoned by our parents' manipulation. I saw them last week, Melissa said suddenly, her voice dropping, the lightness fading. At the prison. I set down my fork, my heart sinking. Why would you do that? I needed closure, I guess. Needed to see them one more time. She took a shaky breath, clearly reliving the painful encounter. Mom tried to guilt trip me. Said I'd betrayed the family. Dad just cried and said he was sorry. But neither of them actually took responsibility. Even now, even after everything, they can't admit they were wrong. Some people never do, I said, a quiet sadness in my voice. They're too broken, too lost in their own choices. But that's not your burden to carry anymore. I know. She smiled, a faint, resolute curve of her lips. I'm not going back. That was goodbye for good this time. We finished dinner and walked through downtown Omaha, past the old courthouse where this had all started. I thought about that day 6 months ago, walking into that courtroom expecting nothing, only to change everything. I thought about my mother's disgust, my father's dismissal, the judge's surprise when she recognized me. I thought about how far I'd come from the 19-year-old sleeping in her car, from the girl told she'd never amount to anything. Do you ever wish things had been different? Melissa asked, her voice quiet in the night air. That we'd had normal parents, a normal childhood? Sometimes, I admitted, a flicker of longing in my heart. But then I think about who I became because of what I went through. The empathy I have for people who are struggling. The fierce drive to fight for justice. The deep understanding that systemic problems hurt real people. Would I have that if I'd grown up comfortable and privileged? I honestly don't know. So, you're saying you're grateful for the trauma? Melissa raised an eyebrow, a teasing note in her voice. I laughed, a genuine warm sound. No. I'm saying I'm grateful for who I became in spite of it. There's a difference. A huge difference. We stopped at a coffee shop, the same one where Melissa had first shown me the damning evidence of our grandfather's murder. So much had changed since that day. So much had been revealed, destroyed, rebuilt. I have something for you, Melissa said, pulling a worn envelope from her purse. I've been holding on to this. It's another letter from Grandpa. Henry Bradford gave it to me after the trial. He said Grandpa wanted you to have it when everything was settled. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. My heart hammered, anticipating what precious words might be inside. Dear Anna, it began. Asterisk, if you're reading this, then you've uncovered the truth about my death. I suspected your parents might try something. I saw the way they looked at my estate, the cold calculations in their eyes. That's why I made sure to leave evidence, to give you the tools to find justice if something happened to me. Asterisk, I'm so proud of you. Not just for your accomplishments but for your character. You have a strength they'll never understand, a moral compass they lack entirely. Use it well. Help people who can't help themselves. Be the person I always knew you were. And remember, the best revenge is living well. Building a life they said you couldn't have. Becoming someone they said you could never be. You've already won, Anna. Everything else is just making sure they face consequences. Asterisk, you are loved. You are worthy. You are enough. Always. Asterisk, Grandpa, tears streamed down my face as I finished reading, a profound aching love filling my chest. Melissa reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her own eyes glistening. He knew, I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. He knew what they might do. And he still tried to protect me even after death. He left clues for me to find. He loved you, Melissa said, her voice soft but firm. Really loved you the way parents should. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my pocket right over my heart. I'm going to keep fighting, I said, a newfound resolve burning within me. For people like Claire, like all those tenants, like everyone who gets trampled by people with power and money. That's how I'll honor him. That's my purpose. And I'll help you, Melissa said, her eyes shining with a shared vision. Once I get my certificate, I'll be right there with you. We'll be a team. I smiled through my tears. A team? I like that. My parents spent their remaining years in separate prisons, their legacy one of greed, murder, and cruelty. My mother died of a stroke 4 years into her sentence, bitter and unrepentant until the very end. My father lived longer, spending his days in the prison library, supposedly trying to understand where he'd gone wrong. But according to Melissa, who visited him once before his death, he never truly grasped it. He died believing he'd been unlucky, that he'd gotten caught rather than done wrong. Some people, I learned, are simply incapable of genuine remorse. The tenants they'd victimized used their restitution to rebuild their lives. Claire sent her daughter to college, her future brightened. Thomas finally got the medical treatment he needed for his chronic conditions, and 3 families were able to buy their first homes. Their suffering hadn't been erased, but at least it had been acknowledged and compensated. Their voices had finally been heard. As for me, I became a partner at Kestrel and Associates and eventually took over when Diane retired. Melissa worked beside me, a brilliant paralegal who understood our clients because she'd felt powerless herself, and then found her own strength. We built something good, something meaningful from the ashes of our broken family. I never married, never had children of my own. My family was the people I helped, the justice I fought for, and the sister who'd found her courage when it mattered most. And sometimes, late at night in my office, I'd take out my grandfather's letters and remember that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't be and using that success to help others they would have crushed. I'd built a life from nothing, proved my worth without their approval, and ensured they faced consequences for their crimes. In the end, that was victory enough. This journey, from discarded daughter to the one who brought my parents to justice, was long, agonizing, and often terrifying. But it showed me that strength isn't about power or money. It's about integrity, truth, and the courage to stand up, even when it means tearing down your own world to rebuild it better. Now, I'm building that better world alongside my sister, fighting for those who, like me, were told they were worthless. It's a fight I'll never stop. What about you? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Have you ever unearthed a truth so shocking it changed everything you thought you knew? Tell me your story in the comments below. I'm truly eager to hear them.